If you look at the Sunday papers, it's absolutely clear the political season has restarted properly. There's the Observer with that NHS story that you were hearing about as it splashed. And we're going to be talking to Chris Hopson, the NHS bod behind this story, after the news review, I should say. Feel-good factor from the Paralympics and grammar schools there. Grammar schools, the splash in the Sunday Times. But also, very interesting story here, HS2 is in trouble again. Its boss has just quit. It's spiralling out of control, think many people, in terms of funding. So that's another big challenge for Theresa May. The Vaz story on the front page of the Sunday Times as well. And the Vaz story all over the Mail on Sunday. Keith Vaz's wife has given an interview. I forgive the betrayal, she says. And then again, the Sunday Mirror, Vaz offered to fly escorts around the world. Now, there are many, many other stories in the Sunday papers which we will properly cover, or some of them anyway. We're going to start with grammar schools because this is the story that runs through virtually every single paper. Peter, there is a column by a certain Peter Hitchens on the same subject in the Mail on Sunday, I noticed.
Yes, rejoicing over the extraordinary fact that Mrs May has actually copied me. What I really enjoyed most of all was her using my long-tried slogan that we already have school selection in this country, but by house price, something I've been saying for longer than I can remember, which completely demolishes the argument that selection will be reintroduced if you bring grammar schools back. It'll be selection by ability instead.
So you think it filtered its way into the Prime Minister's subconscious?
Somehow or other. I never thought she'd do it. She used to be rather coy about even admitting she'd been to a grammar school. I see the hand of Mr Nick Timothy, her advisor in this, who is a grammar school boy and very keen on it. And
this is going to be a really big event in terms of education. The Sunday Times has got a big splash on the number of grammar schools. They have,
and they actually say that councils are beginning to draw up plans for new grammar schools, which I very much hope they do. And this will be the test of it, whether people can actually open new academically selective schools in large numbers and whether they can be made to succeed in the Britain of today. I think it is very possible, but it's going to be a fight because there are an awful lot of people with very strong interests who are opposed to it.
Absolutely, and there is a big division inside the Tory party. Polly Toynbee, you yourself must be pretty dismayed by this, I guess.
I am. I mean, Peter is the great guru of Bring Back the 50s, so I'm not surprised you're in seventh heaven over this. But what's really important about the British education system is that the top half does pretty damn well and has done better and better. The problem in the British education system is in the bottom half. And bringing back grammar schools does nothing about the tail end problem, and particularly the bottom 20%.
And is this what the Observer story leads you to?
Well, very interesting Observer story. The head of the Private Schools Association is saying that it's going to be a huge boost for private schools because what happens is when you have segregation, those middle-class children who don't get into grammar schools don't want to go to secondary moderns, so there is a big boost in sending them to private schools. There's also a big boost in primary private schools so that people get tuition
to pass the 11th. That is the most
plus.
extraordinary nonsense, though, of course. The complete remaking of the private schools in this country, many of which were on their way to extinction in the early 60s, was the closing of grammar schools. And it was when they closed. Well, I was privately educated. I remember the great surge of interest into particularly private schools.
But in recent years,
in Germany, where they have never got rid of academically selective state schools, there are practically no private schools.
In recent years, because of the increasing success under both Labour and the Tories, the better results from state schools, comprehensives, proportion of children going to private schools is actually
better results.
You were educated in Germany. I don't know if you have
and the reason
parallel.
why the private schools never got anywhere in Germany is because if you went to a private school in Germany, it said your parents were very rich and you were so not with it that you couldn't even hack it in the state sector. So what you've got to do is a different culture. I'm a Birmingham MP where the King Edward Foundation schools remained a complete combination of some fee-paying, some non-fee-paying. They've now got 25% of their intake from school meals. They're opening university teaching schools which support the schools in the weak areas. And the real problem, I think, which we need to address, as Jeremy Corbyn says in this article, is that we need to address investing in the children, fixing the classroom crisis and making education at all levels accessible. In the West Midlands, we've got a shortage of 45,000 primary school places. Why pick an ideological argument at this stage, which to me does not address the problems on the ground. And that is capacity and not enough teacher training.
Because our national failure has largely been the result of the collapse of good secondary education in the state system, and we need to address it. And if we don't address it, our national failure will carry on getting worse.
Peter, Nicky Morgan, former Education Secretary, attacked the policy straight away, policy change, saying it was weird. Is there a real division inside the Tory party?
Oh, yeah, most of them couldn't care less. Many of them are privately educated, and many of them aren't particularly conservative and know little about education. And they swallow all the stuff that Polly comes up about the tail end and all the rest of it. The truth is, nobody in the British education system benefited from the grammar schools being destroyed. The people who were in them suffered. The people who were in secondary moderns didn't do substantially better in comprehensive.
Politically, what's really,
I'd like to move on
about
from
the politics about this, though, that we thought that Theresa May was a safe pair of hands. She's done something remarkably reckless with the grammar school policy.
Let's move on from grammar schools. We have to stop grammar schools. We have to stop grammar schools now, because we'll get none of the other stories done. And the NHS story is a really important one, Polly Toynbee.
This is very important because you have here a very senior figure who you're speaking to, Chris Hobson, who represents all of the main hospital providers, saying they can't continue like this. 80% of them in deep debt, and being told they've got to bring those debts down, and the funding's going to actually drop very severely in the 2 years before the next election. Either, and the public needs to know this, that either we need to ration services, or they need to accept a much lower quality of standard. It's time for people to realise that we can't keep going like this. It needs more money. The NHS has never had as lower level of funding in terms of increase each year.
Some people will say, Polly, that every year the NHS says there's a crisis and actually life goes on. This is a kind of pre-autumn statement, piece of kind of financial shroud waving, and we shouldn't take it too seriously.
Well, I mean, it's financial shroud waving, in that the Treasury must be very alarmed that technically the Department of Health bust its budget, which is almost unique this year. It would bust it hugely next year unless they get more money. I think that it's not just shroud waving. I think it is. You're right that it's remarkable the NHS has done as well as it has.
But after all,
the funding it's had.
Gisela, the NHS is about to get £350 million a week more as we leave the EU.
Well, first of all, we have to leave the EU, and I think we're going to come on to the thing that we've got to make leaving the EU happen. And until and unless we do, we can make none of these decisions.
But once that happens, that money can go to the NHS.
Well, then I was a health minister in the Blair government, and I know that extra money to the NHS makes a real difference. But you also need to have some structural changes, which in terms around social care, because you cannot keep the two separate.
There's a story in the Observer suggesting that the Brexit camp, that's people like you, have abandoned this pledge.
No, because what you see, and we come on to Change Britain organisation, in a sense, we were a cross-party group which said we want to leave the EU. That will give us the right to make choices on priorities. And for me, the priorities was the NHS, and you need to be in government to actually implement that. So let's leave first,
you think the Tories, who stood in front of that £350 million promise, won't deliver on it?
No, I think first of all we've got to leave, and then we can make the decision. And then, to me and to many of us, the priority is the NHS.
People were cheated badly. Ian Duncan-Smith and a whole lot of people, straight after the Brexit vote, said, "Oh, we never really meant it." That big bus that you stood in front of, people believed there was going to be 350 million more. In which case we wouldn't have the problem
that saying that huge
now.
snakes 350 miles long would be circling the country, and we'd all be doomed and war would follow, and none of that happened either. People don't always tell the truth in campaigns.
Peter, since we're now thoroughly on Brexit, you've got a Mail on Sunday story there about Boris Johnson, who is backing this new ginger group, of who Gisela is the chair.
Featuring Gisela, saying that supposedly trying to push Mrs May towards a hard Brexit rather than the very soft one, which I think a lot of people increasingly suspect she wants, because every time anybody speaks about tough negotiating positions, she slaps them down. And there is a big problem here, which I think the French must have noticed by now, that we can't make our minds what we want.
The problem with the story, it seems to be, is that Boris Johnson's actual words aren't terribly striking or hardcore or inflammatory or indeed anything.
Well, there is always that problem with Boris Johnson, when you analyse what he says rather than what he appears to be.
What's rather amazing is that you had David Davis for the first time standing up at the dispatch box in charge of these negotiations, saying, most improbable we'll stay in the single market. And Number 10 had to slap him down, saying, it's a personal view. What minister has a personal view from the dispatch box? The chaos with, we've got Liam Fox as well. rubbishing British businessmen, yet he's meant to be representing them.
Well, it's true.
And
we
we
have, for the first time in our national history, got a policy without a government to implement it. A government which does not believe in its principal policy, and this is going to cause endless acrobatics for
Is
many,
that
many
why,
years to come.
Gisela, we now have this morning a new organisation? You can tell us about it and show us its website.
We do indeed. It's in the Sun, an article, and it essentially, at essence, is whether you were a Remainer or were you a Leaver. The British people have decided to leave, and we now need to pull together to actually become doers.
So
because
is this kind of hold their feet to the fire? Is that the purpose of the organisation?
It is both things, to remind what the referendum was about, but much more importantly, you know, I'm probably one of the few people who have negotiated across Whitehall with the European Union during the Constitution. I know that even when you've politically agreed, it does become technically very complex, and I think we need to bring together on ideas, make sure that it gets implemented. But above all, the referendum did show some real divisions in this country. It really flagged them up.
So
and I think
you split the party, the country, right down the middle.
Polly, and for Labour to be able to respond to all of these areas who voted to leave and that their needs are met, I think we need to come together and work in their interest rather than try and refight the referendum.
There is no chance of coming together. There is going to be hard Brexiters and soft Brexiters. There are those of us, the 48%, who want to stay as close as possible to Europe. There is your lot and Boris's lot, and you may all be different amongst yourselves, who want a hard Brexit.
Right.
This is not going to be
this is
resolved.
The Bad Losers Party is going to do
people.
everything it can to try and stop this from happening, and may well succeed. Listen to Polly, she may well be, I'm afraid, the voice of the future.
Now, there's a moment on the sofa.
It worries me.
There's a moment.
I'm not recommending
Let's
it.
sorry, I want to do two other stories.
72% turnout. And I think we as politicians have a responsibility to bring people together, not complain about divisions and then
You're just launching a more divisive group.
Why is it divisive?
Chaps and chapesses. Let's try and do a couple more stories before we finish, if you don't mind. One is Liam Fox. Fat and flabby British business. Maybe he was right. I mean, is there a kind of slightly politically correct sense of outrage that everybody's expressing?
Well, I'm in no position to attack anybody for being fat and flabby.
No, nor me, fat and flabby. Right. But I think the idea that you're representing British trade, you're going around the world trying to get good deals, and you actually say, frankly, our business people are rubbish. That is not a good start.
It's not helpful. OK. Final story, I think, today. Peter, the political correctness story, which is the splash on the Sunday Telegraph and appears in Sunday Times and elsewhere.
It is of the
Christmas is threatened, we're told.
The Sunday Telegraph seems to me to have two rather better stories underneath this. So the cabinet split over grammars and HS2 link rail chief departs. But it's gone for this bizarre story about how Christmas is threatened. Now, I dislike political correctness as much as the next man, and possibly more, but I really do not feel that Christmas is in grave danger just at the moment.
All right. Thank you all very much. A fascinating paper review. We got through the big stories at least.